I'll start off with the background on Virginia Woolf. So she lived from 1882 to 1941, which was the Victorian age to the modern age in British literature, and she published it to the Lighthouse in 1927. She was born into a family with 8 siblings, which is just like the book, and she summered in St. Ives, which looked over a lighthouse, like in the book again. She had a comfortable marriage, but was depressed, and in that time period, it's important to remember that in that time period, mental illness wasn't really a thing. So that her depression probably caused her eventual death. So you can continue.
Yeah, so I'll continue with pretty much just characteristics of 19th and 20th century British literature. So the first thing I had about Virginia Woolf was that she talked a lot about, or she was influenced a lot by psychological influences, as Shamali mentioned a little bit, specifically Sigmund Freud. And I noticed in the novel, James Ramsay, the son of obviously Mr. and Miss Ramsay, is sort of in like the Oedipus complex. As you can see in the beginning of the novel, he has a certain section where he talks about like how he wants to viciously and like relentlessly kill his father, and how he almost like adores his mother. So that's sort of like the Oedipus complex in psychology. Another thing I have is she's one of the first main authors to introduce unchronological order of plot, meaning that the plot doesn't fully like follow a particular storyline, and it's everyone's ideas kind of like jumbled together. Another thing is feminism, which I guess represents the time period when she wrote the book. I think women's suffrage was in the 1920s. Is that right? I'm pretty sure it was, but it represents sort of the inequality between Mr. and Miss Ramsay throughout the novel. And then the last thing I have is she was the first to set the precedent for unique disconformity writing style, which is pretty much just unchronological order of plot.
Alright, my thesis was Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse is crafted with third-person narration that allows readers to understand the way the characters perceive events taking place around them. And this style contributes to Woolf's criticism of traditional gender roles of the 20th century. So I'll just go into some of my text evidence. On page 86, she writes, "Women can't write, women can't paint. What did that matter? Coming from him says clearly it was not true to him, but for some reason helpful to him." And that was why he said it. And then in this part, she's talking about Charles Tansley deploring female activity, like in art and literature fields, because he doesn't really think they should belong there, and that is just like more like a man's job.
I'll add on to that because I had that too. So I talked about, I'll just say my thesis actually. Virginia Woolf uses Lily Briscoe's progression of self-doubt in art into the Lighthouse to display her affection yet complex relationship with Mrs. Ramsay. So like you were saying, Tansley was saying like women shouldn't be in art and literature, and Lily, that was like her passion. So throughout the novel, she was uncertain and doubted herself, which is just like the gender roles. And she kept doubting like herself, even with different characters like Miss Ramsay. She just thought she was lower than everyone because of her outside influences.
I mean, my thesis is a lot different than that, so I guess I'll say my thesis. The distortion of time, along with the use of past memories, drive characterization and symbolism throughout the novel. So I was really intrigued with how the book was written because it was something I've never seen before, and it was completely unique. So it didn't go in any order, and it kind of just put everyone's thoughts in, which was really interesting. So one example I have is this was it seemed to him as if their friendship had ceased there on that stretch of road. After that, Ramsay had married. After that, with one thing and another, the pulp had gone out of their friendship. So it was only a small part of the quote on part 1, chapter 4, because I couldn't fit the whole quote in the box. Kind of sucks, but it's pretty much just an example of how Woolf uses distortion of time to describe the relationship of Banks and Mr. Ramsay instead of continuing the plot. So instead of just the events just keep on leading in chronological order, it's sort of a memory of the past, and Wolf uses this a lot throughout this novel.
My thesis is also different. It's Into the Lighthouse, Virginia Woolf displays the opposing viewpoints of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey and how their responses to each other's opinions evolve as they navigate through their lives in the story. So Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey both they're kind of opposite each other. Miss Ramsey sees more optimistically, while Mr. Ramsey is more pessimistic towards the world. An example is in page number 31 to 32. There wasn't the slightest possible chance that they could go to Lighthouse tomorrow, Mr. Ramsey snapped out irascibly. How did he know, she asked. The wind often changed. Their extraordinary rationality of remark, the folly of women's minds enraged him. He'd ridden through the valley of death, had been shattered and shivered, and now she flew in the face of facts, made his children hope what was utterly out of the question. In effect, told lies. She stamped her foot on the stone step. Damn you, he said. But what had she said? Simply that it might be fine tomorrow. So it might. This quote it's in the beginning, so it introduces their relationship, how Mr. Ramsey, he's more towards seeing the real, like the factual evidence toward things. He knows that the weather's not going to be fine, and he knows that they can't go to Lighthouse. Yet Miss Ramsey, she doesn't want to hurt James's feelings. She wants to make everyone happy and please everyone. So she's trying to, even though she knows that it's not possible, she's trying to keep people happy as long as possible.
Okay, mine is also pretty different. My thesis was Virginia Woolf uses the novel to discuss the meaning of life and to relate the characters in the novel to real life. On page, I didn't write the page number. One of my in-text evidence was, it is permissible even for a dying hero to think before he dies how men will speak of him hereafter. His fame lasts perhaps 2,000 years, and what are 2,000 years? What indeed, 30, if you look from a mountaintop to the long wastes of the ages, the very stone one kicks with one's boot will outlast Shakespeare. And in this, Woolf is basically trying to ask, like, how will people remember me after I die? And what will I have to do in order to be remembered for the longest amount of time possible? Because even Shakespeare, eventually he will be forgotten. But life itself will still go on.
I actually really like that thesis because it puts the book and both her life together, and because like she obviously had a really tough life, like both of her parents died early, and I think she committed suicide, right? Like she drowned herself, and yeah, so I really like that thesis, and I thought it was really interesting.
There's actually a connection to Virginia Woolf's. She suffered from depression, and later in life she committed suicide by drowning herself. And towards the end of the book, when Mr. Ramsey is going to the Lighthouse, even though this takes place later in the book, he reads out a play, and this play was written actually by an author named William Cowper, and it was called Castaway, and it was about a sailor who was thrown overboard from his boat, and he, even after calling out for help, no one could help him, and he drowned. And Cowper himself went through depression, and the poem was actually a metaphor for this depression. So Woolf herself, who drowned herself, I think it's ironic that while Mr. Ramsey is saying the quote, which is, "But I beneath a rougher sea was whelmed in deeper gulfs than he, when he's trying to get sympathy from people after Miss Ramsey's death, and he's feeling bad for himself, he's feeling down, like he's lost his rock in life. So it relates to Virginia Woolf's own life, and himself is in a boat to a location, and he's trying to get sympathy from people because I think in his life he is drowning at that moment, figuratively, because he just doesn't have someone who is there for him all the time, and he's trying to find that person, but most people don't want to give him this sympathy.
So, since they didn't have, they were always misdiagnosing depression and, mental illnesses back when Virginia Woolf was writing this, I feel like she put her thoughts into the book through, the stream of consciousness, which really is with every character, like Lily, Mrs. Ramsey, Mr. Ramsey. So yeah, they just think more than they speak, and they really contemplate everything about them. So yeah, that's just really interesting to me. Anyone?
Did anyone read about something specifically about Wolf's life called the Bloomsbury Group? I found that pretty interesting. I don't know if any of you saw that. Yeah, it was a group of a bunch of like intellectuals working together, and I found it cool because like one of the people in the group was this guy like called John Maynard Keynes. He's like a famous economics guy now, and I just thought it was pretty cool how she grew up like sorry about that voice crack. How she grew up pretty much amongst this instability and then all these intellectuals. So the book kind of represents in between her instability and intellect, which I thought was kind of cool.
Well, I want to go back to like the time that we talked about, how like she uses time differently than most novels, because it was hard for me to understand what was happening when I first read it, and so I realized that the majority of the book happens in one day, and then they go through 10 years in like a quarter of the book. So it was really different, like in that way, that they put so much like thinking and description into the, I don't know how many hours, but a short amount of time that she was writing that. And
yeah, like during those 6 hours, we learned a lot about each character and how they thought and how other people observed him. But yet when it went to the second part of the story, which took place in the point of view of the house as it aged through time, the deaths of people like Miss Ramsey and her son, it was like condensed to parentheses.
So now let's discuss some characters, I guess. What's your guys' opinion on Mr. Ramsey and the relationship he has with Miss Ramsey?
he always needs sympathy from her. It's like insecure, which I feel like every character in the book is also insecure. Well, mostly Lily too, with her painting and the gender role thing. But we can talk about that after Mr. Ramsey.
Yeah, Mr. Ramsey, he and Mr. Ramsey, they're kind of opposites, but they kind of fit together. They know each other so well that when Mr. Ramsey wants sympathy, Miss Ramsey's there to give it to him. When Miss Ramsey wants something from Mr. Ramsey, he's able to tell, oh, this is what she wants. So they kind of complement each other well. And then
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Ramsey, like, he always needs, like, a lot of reassurance. So, like, on page 58 and 59, it goes, and touching his hair with her lips, she thought, he will never be so happy again, but stopped herself. Remembering how it angered her husband that she could say that, still it was true. Like, she's like, Mrs. Ramsey's always, like, reflecting on how she needs, like, safety, that, like, agree, like, with his own opinion.
And also later in the story, when Mr. Ramsey and Miss Ramsey go on a walk after their dinner party, they both have problems, but they want to protect each other from their problems. Because Miss Ramsey is talking about, I think it was one of their greenhouse, which needed to be repaired, but she didn't want to burden Mr. Ramsey with that problem. And they're trying to protect each other from being upset because they know they both are opposites, and what they say can really upset another. Like, Miss Ramsey, in a quote on page 70, Miss Ramsey is thinking about what Mr. Ramsey, he doesn't notice in life. Like, she says, indeed he seems to her sometimes made differently from other people. Born deaf, blind, deaf, and dumb to the ordinary things, but to the extraordinary things with an eye like an eagle's. His understandings often astonished her, but did he notice the flowers? No. Did he notice the view? No. Did he even notice his daughter's own beauty, or whether there was pudding on his plate or roast beef? He would sit at the table with them like a person in a dream. He really only focused on the big picture of things, while Miss Ramsey would take a stop and like look at the flowers and look up at the stars, but she never wanted to bother Mr. Ramsey with this, because he knew he wouldn't care. Like, in a quote, she's looking at the stars and she knows if she told him, all he would say was, poor little world, with one of his sighs. He would not think of it as beautiful. He'd be thinking, oh, this world is so small compared to the world out there, instead of staying positive.
I mean, just that the Ramseys pretty much represent Virginia Woolf's parents in real life, which I thought was pretty cool. And I guess that's why Woolf uses a lot of, I guess, sympathetic words to describe Miss Ramsey.
Lily now?
Yeah.
So Lily, I feel like when I was reading, I thought she connected the entire novel together, even though she, like Mrs. Ramsey, like kind of took control. Lily in her painting, She even closes the book, which I'll read that quote. Just quickly, as if she were recalled by something over there, she turned to her canvas. There it was, her picture. Yes, with all its green and blues, its line running up and across, its attempt at something. It would be hung in the attic, she thought. It would be destroyed. But what did that matter, she asked herself, taking up with her brush again. She looked at the steps. They were empty. She looked at her canvas. It was blurred. With a sudden intensity, as if she saw it for a second, she drew a line there and in the center. It was done. It was finished. Yet she thought, laying down her brush in extreme fatigue, I have had my vision. So that's the last passage in the story. And for context, Miss Ramsey has passed away by then, and Lily has just seen Mr. Ramsey and the children arrive at the lighthouse, which, because Miss Ramsey passed away, it gives Lily some freedom because she was always doubting herself with Miss Ramsey over like social constructs like marriage, and it allows her to have a revelation around her own work, and so she finishes it and she's had her vision, so it's kind of like closing up all of this like insecurity that she felt throughout the book. And she says in it, she says that her painting would be hung in the attic, she thought, so it's still showing that she's still like doubting herself and that no one really cares about it, but the fact that she finished her painting shows that like this whole stream of consciousness may come to an end. Do you know what I'm talking about? Kind of.
Like her thinking more about other people thinking about her instead of her thinking independently.
Yeah, she never thought independently, mostly because she was a woman in the time, and she was just threatened, I guess, by Mrs. Ramsey's like power and like she has so many children. She's married. She's like living a traditional like family life, while Lily doesn't have kids. She's not married, so she feels like Miss Ramsey's kind of power over her. And so when Miss Ramsey dies, she's finally able to finish her painting, which shows that she got some sense of closure.
I liked how throughout the book, even though Lily, she was kind of enchanted by the idea of Miss Ramsey, she never tried to conform to be like her. She knew that she didn't want to get married and she wanted to do art no matter what people like Tansley told her, like women can't do art or do what they want.
Somewhere. I have just a small quote. And it would never be seen, never be hung even, that there was Mr. Tansley whispering in her ear, women can't paint, women can't write. On page 48. Just, if you're gonna, okay. Anyone want to move on to a different topic?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could discuss themes throughout the novel. I mean, that's sort of our theses, but yeah, so pretty much mine was just the distortion of time, and pretty much just the uniqueness behind Wolf's writing. I mean, at first it was kind of hard to follow, but then I guess you kind of get used to it, and it's kind of an interesting style. I don't really know. I mean, like, what do you guys think of that?
I
Like
think
the
when
writing
she
style?
put time made it interesting how Tamale said, like, the first almost half of the book took place in the span of a couple of hours, but in those hours I feel like they were the most important of them all, where we really got to analyze the characters, and into the time passes, it shows over like a decade, yet it's a short amount of time. It has information more about the house, less about the people, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was like really hard to follow, but like it gave a lot of insight into like how everyone perceived the things around them.
When I first read it, I didn't know Miss Ramsey died until like the final passages, because it was so short, and I was paying attention to like the description in the house and everything. So I didn't see it at first.
It was definitely harder to follow, but it also helped to emphasize the larger, more important moments in the book.
Yeah, like Shimali said before, I thought it was kind of weird how the part when it talks about Miss Ramsey's death isn't like It's extremely short. I don't know if you can find it.
I'll try.
But like it's such a minuscule part of the book, which is weird because it's such like an impactful moment on the rest of the family.
Mr. Ramsey stumbling along the passage one dark morning stretched out his arms. But Miss Ramsey, having died rather suddenly the night before, his arms, though stretched out, remained empty.
And then the next chapter starts. So that was really short. And so like the entire part here, the second section is the perspective of the house, and it's not very long, but it passes through, I think it was 10 years of time before they came back to the house.
Yeah, focusing on like the dust piling up and the light from the lighthouse trying to just going through the room, kind of.
And the maids, or the person keeping up the house. I thought there was a lot of symbolism in this, especially with going back to Lily again. The painting, her painting is abstract. It's not like realistic, and it was of Mrs. Ramsey and her son. And instead of just painting what you saw, she painted like symbols and not symbols, but like shadows to represent Mrs. Ramsey. And that's why she was so, like, she doubted herself the entire time, because her perspective was different as an abstract artist versus like everyone else before her. And I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, the symbolism there is that she paints Mrs. Ramsey as like the epitome of motherhood, and it shows like her affection for her there as well. With like, without painting Miss Ramsey, you can still tell that she has some affection or like adoration for her. Is there any symbols?
I mean, I guess like, what do you guys think the lighthouse would represent? Or represents? I guess that's kind of important.
I think that for each person it's kind of different. Because like for someone like James, he just wants to go to the lighthouse because he's a kid, and I think he sees kind of adventure there. While like Mr. Ramsey, he doesn't think, at first he really doesn't want to go to the lighthouse because I don't think he's not able to attain his full potential yet. So I feel like that's why he doesn't really want to go. Like how he's stuck on, I think it was R in his because he thought like people went from A to Z, and like only once in a generation someone reached Z, and he wasn't there yet.
I mean, I think the lighthouse kind of drives characterization throughout the novel, which is weird because just the parts about the lighthouse, you can kind of determine the personalities of the particular characters in the novel. So like, Mr. Ramsey is obviously hesitant about going to the lighthouse, and he doesn't want to go, which represents his sort of pessimistic personality. And then Miss Ramsey encourages James that maybe they can go later, which is representation of her optimistic personality, I guess. So I feel like you can figure out a few of what their desires and personalities are just by the scenes involving the lighthouse. And anyone have topics to put in? I guess.
All right. What do you think I'm so sorry. What do you think of the other people? Like, what do you think they represent when they were in the boat on the way to the lighthouse? And new friends, and Virginia Woolf started going into deep detail about them. What do you think?
Like James, like Miss Ramsey was projected. I mean, she thought would happen. He grew up with resentment towards Mr. Ramsey after not allowing him to go to the lighthouse. So the whole way he was kind of trying to get Cam not to give him sympathy, even though Mr. Ramsey was kind of begging for it. So I thought that was interesting.
I feel like he grows to like his father. Not like, it doesn't show it, but I feel like he becomes like, not his father himself, but a shadow of him, I guess. So I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry.
I thought that was kind of interesting that they spent so much time talking about the lighthouse, but when they finally got there, they were kind of just like, oh, this is it.
Yeah. And then it moves on and to the painting, and then the book is done.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Okay.
When you guys are talking about women, like the women can't do literature and art thing. I found it very interesting. You kind of opened up my eyes to something else. So this book got people to read what Virginia Woolf had to say, because you know it's a book, so they voluntarily read it. But she got them to read what she wanted through the characters' thoughts, if that makes sense. So the characters were thinking about things, and she made commentary through the characters thinking about feminism and about women's roles, and that made them listen to her without actually her saying that I think it should be different. And I think it's ironic how this whole women can't do art, but Woolf impacts feminism greatly through this book for decades to come. Your thoughts on that? I heard you guys say that, and I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that one of her like underlying themes in the book kind of is like feminism, kind of projected through Lily, of her not taking like the ordinary role like Miss Ramsey would be, the typical like mother who just cares about. Miss Ramsey, she sees herself as having kind of control over all the men, like kind of thinking she can do whatever she wants with them, give them whatever she wants, and they are kind of hypnotized by her in the book. While Lily's kind of, even like with Tansley when he says, oh, we can't go to Lighthouse, Lillian asks him, would you be able to take me, kind of mocking him. I thought that was kind of funny.
So for like for context, or a quote to like represent what you're saying, this is Lily talking to Banks, where he's doubting, like he's looking at the painting, he's like, I don't understand what this is. So the quote is, it was Mrs. Ramsey reading to James. She said, she knew his objection, that no one could tell it for a human shape, but she had made no attempt at likeness, she said. For what reason had she introduced them then? He asked. Why indeed? Except that if there, in that corner, it was bright, here in this, she felt the need of darkness, mother and child then, objects of universal veneration, and in this case, the mother was famous for her beauty, might be reduced, he pondered, to a purple shadow without irreverence. So, to connect both of your thoughts, she keeps thinking about her thoughts over, like, the man's, which shows that she still, like, has passion for art. So even with her self-doubt, she wants to get over it, but even though it's like it trails around her. And then her admiration for Mrs. Ramsey shown here with the mother and child, then objects of universal veneration. Veneration means admiration or adoration. So it shows like how much she was hypnotized by Miss Ramsey too.
I kind of also thought that her portrayal of emotion was interesting, how James, at the mention of not being able to Lighthouse, he wanted to murder his father, and he was only a young kid, so I thought that was funny. And then at Miss Ramsey's mention of maybe the weather will be nice, he was enraged by that remark, which it showed how these people, how an emotion will affect how they're acting, and kind of through the way that she wrote the story, we saw each kind of little thought that came into each person's action, like in how they express themselves, so I thought that was interesting.
I really don't know what to talk about. Like, does anyone have any good ideas
I have a
to talk
question.
about? Like,
What do you think, like, the symbolism is behind their reactions when they actually got to the lighthouse at the end? Like, their reactions weren't really what you'd think it would be. It was kind of like, almost like, oh, that's it. So what do you think, like, the symbolism, or like what it means, what it represents, like their reactions to it? I don't know if that makes sense.
Kind of how the journey is, I guess, more important than the destination sometimes. They kind of learn a lot about themselves throughout the novel, I think. With James grew up, and Mr. Ramsey, I think he realized how dependent he was upon other people, because before he had Miss Ramsey just to give him whatever he wanted.
I have a quote like from like late in the novel. I'll just read it. It kind of relates to this. So, it will rain, he remembered his father saying, you won't be able to go to the lighthouse. The lighthouse was then a silvery, misty-looking tower with a yellow eye that opened suddenly and softly in the evening. Now, James looked at the lighthouse. He could see the whitewashed rocks, the tower stark and straight. He could see that it was bare with black and white. He could see windows in it. He could even see washing spread on the rocks to dry. So that was the lighthouse, was it? No, the other was also the lighthouse, for nothing was simply one thing. The other lighthouse was true too. It was sometimes hardly to be seen across the bay. In the evening, one looked up and saw the eye opening and shutting, and the light seemed to reach them in that airy, sunny garden where they sat. So pretty much James just reminisces about when his father refused to take them to the lighthouse earlier, and kind of, I guess that the lighthouse from his past memory is like a new lighthouse from the one of actuality. So there's like kind of two lighthouse. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's like two lighthouses which represent his sort of previous optimism, and the second one which represents the actuality and like the current moment, like the present moment. So, any other topics?
Well, you can keep going with that. Like when you say that, like I think of like how when we're little we see things a certain way, and then as we grow up, like you'll see something that you saw that like you grew up seeing, and you'll see it a completely different way. And like kind of going off of that, like how do you what do you think her purpose was in writing Stream of Consciousness? Like why? How did that like make the book what it is? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it just relates to her life, and I've read something about this, but I can't seem to remember it, about like why she wrote the book this way, and like why it was so unique to like previous books.
When Freud theory is of unconscious, it changed the way people saw behavior. So maybe she wanted to go into that and try to write from a perspective of multiple people and what goes into a decision, instead of just in a normal story how they're just kind of describing what happens. She's really putting effort into what drives a person to do something.
So you guys have brought up a bunch of different points, but what do you think was the most important? Like what she was trying to say about gender roles, what she was trying to say about the unconscious, what she was trying to say about time. Like what do you think was the biggest impact that she was trying to make?
I mean, I guess we all have individual thoughts, and that sort of like reflects our theses. But for me, I'd say time, like the distortion of time. I mean, that was why I picked it. I thought that was really interesting, and it made the novel what it is today. It made Wolf's writing extremely unique.
I think, well, just my opinion, but I think it would be the consciousness part of it, where she's really bringing everything through her thoughts, and how like she's showing the progression of the characters through like thoughts, descriptions, like how they thought. So she's probably taught like everything that's on her mind. She's bringing through this like stream of consciousness idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Consciousness. I thought it was interesting. Like most stories you read that we don't really. I've never read a book like written like this. I thought it was interesting to get different perspectives from like all the characters, and we really got to know them.
So, when you guys say that she spent all that time talking about the character analysis, do you think that was more like impactful in her novel and what she was trying to say than like the actual like chronological order of what happened? Because she spent all that time in the beginning talking about the perspectives of each character, and like 10 years goes by in like a couple pages, and like her death is like you said, Haley, is minimized to parentheses. Do you think she used the characterization more to her use than the actual like time, not time, but like actual facts of time? Does that make sense?
I think she did. She really spent a lot of time trying to introduce all the characters, and once we were introduced them, she really condensed the amount of time, like from a decade into 20 pages, about when the full beginning part was just about the characters, and in the end even, it was more about the characters too.
To add on to that, do you guys think it was like effective to do that, or do you guys think it would have been like her writing style would have been like more more seen if like she had like more so of a plot and like facts, or do you guys think she did a good thing with like the characters?
I think that if she had dialogue, like more dialogue, then we wouldn't see like what the characters, like we would see what they thought, but like their inner mind kind of. And also, like, if it was dialogue, it wouldn't be like that section with the house, the perspective of the house. It gave, like, it shows what happened to the house, like, what happened during that time. If it was, like, dialogue and, like, just description of, like, through third person, then it would have been, like kind of passed over, like, oh, 10 years passed, and then here's the characters again, that kind of thing. So I feel like it was better that way.
Going off the characters and the analysis of how much impact they have because of the description and the dialogue, I have a question. When I was reading online a little bit about this book to do just some research about it before I came to class, I read this article about how there's a debate if there's an actual plot to this book. And I was wondering what you guys thought about that. Do you think there is a plot? Do you don't think there isn't enough plot? There's obviously things that happen, but what do you think about plot-wise? Because it feels like, at least to me, I read this and I was like, there are 3 things that happen, and that's kind of it. Do you think there's a plot?
Yeah, I don't really think there's much of a plot, but I think it needs to be written that way to like get in like everyone like just focusing on the way like they're characterized and like what they're thinking, just to comment on certain things like gender roles and like the stream of consciousness.
I sort of guess it depends on how you define plot. So it's kind of interpretational to the specific person.
Like, I feel like there is kind of like a climax or like the main area, which is like the dinner, which is like the main, it's like the longest chapter, and it's the main part where it's mostly Mrs. Ramsey's perspective, I think, but yeah,
it kind of builds up to the dinner.
and you see like every character's like perspective kind of thoughts like at that dinner. So I feel like there was a plot, but the main part of it was in that chapter, I think.
Do you think that like maybe like going back to like the characterization thing, like do you think it's fair to say that maybe she's trying to also convey like the contents of like a person's character maybe more important than how they like act? Because like I mean she spends like a whole lot of time characterizing people and kind of describing their character, and then like when it comes to something big like an action, like whether it be like nothing like I mean like you said, like not much like actually happens as far as plot. Like do you think it could be like they're spending time like so that you could get to know like them as people, like basically telling a story based on just their character as opposed to like their actions?
Well, I think just lost it again. Wow. Oh, so I think they show the thoughts more than the actions, because in that time especially there were more social constructs and like, so it kind of, she got rid of those kind of with their thoughts instead. So like with Lily, she was like this socially, she was a woman, so she was kind of like oppressed, but through her art, like in her thoughts, you kind of saw like her development through her mind and how like her eventual freedom when Miss Ramsey died, stuff like that.
Do you think the lack of plot kind of represents life, because our life doesn't follow a plot? So do you think Wolf was trying to mimic that in her stream of consciousness and the way that she played out her novel?
Can you repeat the first part again?
So like our life doesn't have a plot, so I think like that's why her book doesn't have a plot, because it's trying to mimic the lives of the Ramseys.
Yeah, kind of. It's following like a day. It doesn't build up to some like adventure or something. It's just normal people going through a normal day. Like Miss Ramsey goes to the market, they have dinner, maybe they take like a trip to the Lighthouse. Like nothing like out of the ordinary to happen.
I think that's what makes it unique. Like we think it's unique just because it's writing, but it's really not, because it's more so compared to our lives than like a lot of other books.
Because our lives don't have plots. Like
yeah, it's just like a normal everyday life. Like it's more compared to our lives.
It's nothing like the Mayor of Casterville.
Also, I think it's totally like a commentary, because like I know like I have days like on the weekend where it's like, you know, I get up, make good coffee, go like lay down and watch TV for like a couple hours. Like no one wants to read about that, you know. But I think that that's like how most people's lives, like most people have days like where not much happens, or like not everybody follows like some grand adventure in their lives. And I think that maybe this is kind of like saying like it's okay to not necessarily have anything more than like mundane life.
So I kind of asked this my question earlier, but like since we're saying there really wasn't a plot, like what do you think the meaning of the book was? I feel like no one gave it was.
Well, since they wasn't a plot, like back to the stream of
There really
consciousness.
is no meaning, you think?
I mean, like,
It's kind of just showing the characters and how they're acting, like how a normal person would just act in their life without some crazy event just occurring.
It's kind of, I feel like it's just to show the thoughts and like of a person kind of, and like the conflicts they face in their head, like insecurity, all of that. I don't know if she needed like an adventure or someone to like die or deception or something to show like what people think on a daily basis kind of thing.
Kind of showing like how people go through their inner battles, yet like how Mr. Ramsey on the inside, he was pretty much driving himself insane, thinking about his future. But on the outside, it's not like he was running around telling everyone that what he was thinking. And same with Miss Ramsey, think about like Lily and all those people. It shows like everything that's going on in their minds, kind of, and not their actual actions. Is that a question?
I was just gonna comment. I feel like many times in literature, everything, it's like if you were to like reduce it, it always comes down to something so simple, like Hamlet is like betrayal, but it's just like a very extreme version of it. Like it's like, you know, we see it like it's like, oh, this might happen in real life, so you have to kind of look past all that. But then for this book, it's like this is the like reduced version. Like it's like so many times we're looking at these things and we're trying to like see someone's depth because they go so far. Like everything, they all like share usually something. But with this book, it's just like it is the reduced version. Personally, I think that they're just like looking for like a meaning of life. And it's like many times in books we see that kind of theme, like, oh, meaning of life, except it'll be like, oh, this boy runs away from home, and he like sails away, and he goes to an island and finds all this stuff, and it's like, oh, what is the purpose of this? Like, just finding meaning of life. And in this book, I feel like we're thinking too hard. Like, it's straight up, like, they're just living life. Like, for us, we still think it too. You know, like, being seniors, it's like, oh, what's the meaning of life, going to college? But, like, if someone wrote a book, like, Shamali sits in class, has a discussion. You're not gonna think, like, oh, so interesting, she's questioning her life. Like, but it's just, like, it's so simple and, like, blatantly there. Like, it's just, like, they're living their lives, and they're trying to understand the meaning of it while doing so. But it's just, like, an extremely reduced and straight version of it.
I think that's a good point, like a really good point. Because like most of the books we read in English, most of the books like Hamlet was about like my man's Hamlet was just going around and just killing everyone. Like this is just a book about they just want to take a boat to a lighthouse. That's all they want to do.
So if that's all they want to do, why is Mr. Ramsey so sufficient in saying no every single time?
I mean, I didn't say
Somebody tell me what that represents.
Because Mr. Ramsey's extremely pessimistic. And
why?
I guess he was
Just because he doesn't want to. Like, sometimes I don't want to go to the store,
He's
but
just
I
like a
have to
negative
go
person.
anyway. Like,
It's been like 30 years when the story translates to them finally getting on the boat.
okay.
And he's like 7
You know when
years old.
someone has a good point and then they just keep on trying, or like a bad point, and then they just keep on trying to defend it? It's like, I didn't mean that like to me. I meant that to Mr. Ramsey. That was towards Mr. Ramsey. Yeah.
That was
Miss
recorded.
Pomerantz, I did not mean any hatred towards any of my fellow classmates.
Okay, you have 3 minutes left, so why don't you in the Fishbowl wrap up what your final thoughts are based upon comments and questions you received, feedback you provided, and your thoughts on the book.
The simplicity and uniqueness is what makes the book extremely interesting and different.
Yeah, how there's no need to have a full-blown plot. People can just live their lives and you can still have a story out of it where you still learn a lot about the characters and what they want in life.
Like, you can relate yourself to a character. It doesn't have to be like in Hamlet, like killing people. Even like the thought of like depression, it's inside your brain, so it's still there. So it's like relevant to you. I feel like Virginia Woolf shows that throughout the book. Also, Miss Pomerantz Treya wasn't here today, so for our group, just to let you know.